I woke up as the BL novel's forgotten character, so I opened a bakery instead. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, it is free, and it is the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic and emotional stories like this one. Your support truly means the world to us. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from and what time it is where you are right now. We love seeing how far these stories travel and knowing who is joining us today. Now, let's begin today's story. If the novel forgot me, then maybe I finally had the freedom to write my own ending. That was the first thought Caleb Morgan had after waking beneath a ceiling he had never seen before. The room was narrow, the mattress beneath him uncomfortable, and morning sunlight slipped through faded curtains onto wooden floorboards. For several seconds, Caleb wondered whether he was dreaming. Then memories arrived. Belrose, the kingdom of Alderwyn, alphas, betas, omegas, noble families, and a complicated romance involving powerful men whose names Caleb knew far too well. His stomach dropped. He knew this world because he had read about it. It belonged to a BL novel from his previous life. Caleb rushed toward a small mirror and stared at the unfamiliar young man reflected there. Brown hair, gray eyes, pale skin, and a face that triggered one tiny memory from hundreds of pages. Caleb Morgan. He searched his memory harder. Then he remembered. The original Caleb had appeared once. One sentence mentioned a quiet beta leaving the capital for Belrose. After that, nothing. No romance. No heroic destiny. No tragic ending. The author had apparently forgotten he existed. Caleb slowly sat down. Strangely, relief replaced fear. He knew what happened to characters who remained close to the original plot. Political scandals, broken engagements, obsessive rivalries, and enough emotional chaos to fill several lifetimes. Caleb wanted none of it. If the story had forgotten him, he intended to return the favor. The body. He inherited possessed modest savings and ownership papers for an abandoned storefront on Belrose's Market Street. Caleb inspected it that afternoon. The windows were dusty, the sign was crooked, and the old brick oven looked as though it had not been used in decades. Caleb smiled anyway. In his previous life, baking had been the one hobby that made difficult days feel manageable. Bread was understandable. Flour, water, yeast, salt, patience. No destiny required. 3 weeks later, the storefront smelled of butter, cinnamon, coffee, and fresh sourdough. Caleb painted a simple name above the entrance, Morningstar Bakery. He spent his first evening preparing dough for opening day, quietly enjoying the unfamiliar peace. Outside, Belrose settled beneath a clear night sky. Inside, Caleb slid the final loaf into the restored brick oven. Then something beneath his feet became warm. He looked down. A thin line of white gold light had appeared between the floor tiles. Another line joined it. Then another, forming part of an ancient symbol hidden beneath the bakery. Caleb stared at the glowing floor. He had chosen this place because it was supposed to have nothing to do with the novel's plot. Somewhere beneath the bricks, something seemed to disagree. By sunrise, the white gold lines beneath the bakery floor had disappeared, leaving Caleb with nothing but questions and 12 trays of dough that still needed attention. He considered pulling up the tiles, then decided against it. Whatever ancient mystery had chosen his bakery could wait until after opening day. Bread could not. By 7 o'clock, Morningstar Bakery was warm with the scent of sourdough, cinnamon rolls, brown butter, and freshly brewed coffee. Caleb arranged the pastries behind the glass counter and opened the door. His first customer was an elderly beta who bought half a loaf and promised to tell her neighbors. Then came 2 shopkeepers, 3 children carrying copper coins, and an Omega seamstress named Nora who stared at the honey rolls as though calculating whether breakfast was worth sacrificing part of her weekly budget. Caleb recognized the expression. "Those are today's sample batch," he said, placing one in a paper bag. "No charge if you tell me whether they need more cinnamon." Nora blinked. "You are giving it away? I am purchasing an honest opinion." She smiled for the first time. By noon, Caleb had learned something the novel never bothered mentioning. Belrose was full of ordinary people with ordinary worries, and their lives mattered even if no author had given them chapters. The bakery became busy enough that Caleb barely noticed the strange calm settling over the room until a broad-shouldered alpha merchant entered while arguing with his assistant. His presence immediately made several customers tense. Then he crossed the threshold and stopped. His shoulders lowered. His voice softened. He looked around, confused. What is that smell? Caleb glanced toward the oven. Probably rosemary bread. The alpha laughed uncertainly. Whatever it is, I suddenly feel like I slept 8 hours. Caleb smiled, but his attention dropped toward the floor. For 1 second, white gold light shimmered between the tiles beneath the man's shoes. Caleb said nothing. Over the next several days, the pattern repeated. An exhausted alpha courier relaxed after drinking coffee near the oven. An anxious Omega said the bakery felt safer than anywhere else in town. Even children seemed reluctant to leave. Caleb began recording everything in a notebook, refusing to call it magic before he had evidence. Time of day, oven temperature, ingredients, customer reactions. No obvious pattern emerged except one. The effect became strongest whenever Caleb was baking. On the 7th morning, he was carrying a tray of warm bread toward the counter when the front bell rang. Conversation faded almost instantly. A tall man in a dark coat entered, and Caleb nearly dropped the tray. He knew that face. Every reader of the novel would have known it, although barely anything had ever been explained about him. Julian Blackwell, the powerful Alpha Duke who disappeared halfway through the original story without explanation, stood inside Morningstar Bakery. Julian inhaled once, slowly, and the guarded tension in his expression vanished. Then his eyes found Caleb. Interesting, he said, quietly. For the first time in 10 years, my instincts are silent. Julian Blackwell stood just inside the doorway as though crossing the threshold had transported him somewhere impossible. Caleb forced himself to set the tray on the counter before his hands betrayed his surprise. In the novel, Julian had been described as one of Alderwyn's most influential alphas, a duke with enough political authority to challenge ministers, and enough wealth to own half the businesses on 3 major streets in the capital. Yet the book had treated him strangely. Julian appeared several times, offered warnings nobody understood, and then vanished around the middle of the story. No explanation. No farewell. Caleb remembered readers arguing online about whether the author had simply abandoned his subplot. Now Julian was standing 10 feet away, looking more tired than mysterious. Rosemary bread, Caleb said, because discussing baked goods seemed safer than admitting he knew details about the man's fictional future. Julian glanced toward the oven. Bread makes alpha instincts disappear? I would be charging considerably more if it did. A few customers laughed, and something almost like amusement softened Julian's expression. He ordered 1 rosemary loaf and black coffee, then chose the small table beside the front window. Caleb expected him to leave after breakfast. Instead, Julian stayed nearly 40 minutes, quietly watching Market Street, while the tension gradually disappeared from his shoulders. The next morning, he returned at exactly 7:15. Same bread, same coffee, same table. By the 4th morning, Caleb stopped pretending it was coincidence. You know I bake other things, he said while wrapping Julian's loaf. I have noticed. The cinnamon rolls are popular. Too sweet. Apple turnovers. Also too sweet. Caleb raised an eyebrow. You have a complicated relationship with happiness. Julian actually smiled. It transformed his severe face enough that Caleb briefly forgot he was speaking to one of the novel's most intimidating alphas. Their conversations remained small at first. Weather, coffee, Belrose merchants. Why Caleb preferred the bakery before. Sunrise. Julian never asked intrusive questions, and Caleb appreciated that more than he expected. More importantly, Julian never treated him differently because everyone believed Caleb was a beta. There was no condescension, no assumption that status determined intelligence. One morning, Julian found Caleb studying his notebook between customers. Research, he asked. Caleb hesitated, then showed him the recorded changes in customer behavior. Julian read every page carefully. You noticed all this in 1 week? Patterns are useful. Most people would call it coincidence. Coincidence is what people call a pattern before they understand it. Julian looked at him for a long moment. You are an unusual baker, Caleb Morgan. Before Caleb could answer, warmth spread beneath his feet. White gold light flickered between the floor tiles. Julian immediately looked down. His expression changed. He had seen it. More unsettlingly, he seemed to recognize it. "Where did you get this building?" Julian asked. Caleb's pulse quickened. "Why?" Julian crouched beside the glowing symbol without touching it. When he looked up again, the relaxed customer Caleb had begun to know was gone, replaced by the guarded Duke from the novel. Because that symbol should not exist anymore. Julian remained beside the glowing symbol until the light faded, but Caleb could tell the Duke was withholding something. "You recognize it," Caleb said. Julian stood slowly. "I have seen a similar design in restricted royal records, but never this clearly." Caleb wanted answers, yet another problem suddenly pushed itself to the front of his mind. In the original novel, Belrose suffered a food shortage shortly before the main romance moved toward the capital. Caleb remembered the detail because it had seemed like background tragedy, mentioned in barely 2 paragraphs. According to the story, heavy rains disrupted grain deliveries, merchants panicked, flour prices tripled, and smaller bakeries closed. Caleb looked through the window at Market Street. If his memory was correct, the first supply failure would happen within days. He could investigate ancient symbols later. Hundreds of ordinary people could. Not eat a mystery. That afternoon, Caleb visited every baker he knew in Belrose. Instead of buying extra flour for himself, he proposed something unusual: combine their orders, diversify suppliers, and create a shared reserve large enough to keep basic bread affordable. Several owners laughed at first. Caleb showed them numbers. 1 delayed wagon could be coincidence. 3 suppliers reporting the same flooded northern road was a pattern. He suggested purchasing grain from farms west of Belrose, where transportation relied on a different route. Julian quietly used his commercial contacts to confirm Caleb's information, but he never took credit or control. Within 3 days, 6 bakeries joined the plan. When the northern deliveries finally stopped, Belrose did not panic. Morningstar Bakery limited specialty pastries, prioritized simple loaves, and shared flour with smaller shops rather than raising prices. Nora organized neighborhood deliveries for elderly residents. The Alpha merchant from Caleb's opening week offered warehouse space at no charge. A crisis Caleb remembered from the novel simply failed to happen. That realization unsettled him more than the glowing floor. Late one evening, after the final customer left, Caleb sat across from Julian with 2 cups of coffee between them. "Something was supposed to happen here," Caleb said carefully. He could not explain the novel, not yet. "And I think I changed it." Julian studied him without laughing. "Was the original outcome better?" "No." "Then why are you afraid?" Caleb looked toward the quiet street. "Because if one event changes, everything after it might change too." Julian considered that. Perhaps the future was never fixed. Perhaps people simply kept making choices nobody thought to question. Caleb looked back at him. The sentence landed harder than Julian could know. Caleb had spent weeks treating this world like a book whose ending already existed. But Belrose was not ink on a page anymore. Nora worried about rent. Bakers worried about flour. Julian drank coffee too slowly when he finally felt safe enough to relax. These were lives, not plot devices. Then the floor beneath them warmed. White gold light appeared again, brighter than ever, spreading outward from the oven. This time the symbol did not vanish. It formed a complete crest, and Julian's face went pale with recognition. "Caleb," he whispered, "I know which royal house that belongs to." Julian kept his eyes on the white gold crest beneath the bakery floor. "House Aurelis," he said at last. Caleb searched the memories of the novel and found almost nothing. That name had never appeared in the main story. What happened to them? Julian looked toward the dark windows before answering. Officially, House Aurelis never existed. That was enough to make Caleb's stomach tighten. Julian explained that years earlier, while studying restricted royal archives, he had discovered scattered references to a forgotten dynasty associated with grain, sanctuary, and a white gold crest. Every complete record had been removed. Caleb grabbed a sack of flour and scattered a thin layer across the warm tiles. Fine white powder settled into grooves invisible to the naked eye, revealing a circle of wheat surrounding a 7-pointed star. Then the oven gave off a gentle pulse of warmth. The crest brightened. White gold light traveled beneath the flour and climbed the old bricks like sunrise spreading across a wall. Caleb stepped closer. The shelves around him began to glow softly. Even the dried wheat hanging above the counter shimmered with tiny points of light. Julian remained perfectly still. "This is not ordinary magic," he whispered. Caleb reached toward the center of the crest. The moment his fingertips touched the warm stone, memories flashed through him. A bright kitchen larger than any bakery. A woman laughing as she placed flour on a little boy's nose. Golden fields stretching beyond white towers. A man's voice calling him his son. Then darkness, followed by a promise spoken close to his ear. Even if history forgets you, the hearth will remember. Caleb pulled his hand back. Words appeared across the floor in white gold script. Julian knelt to read them. His voice became quiet. The hearth remembers the prince whom history forgot. Caleb stared at him. Prince. Another memory surfaced, sharper than the others. He saw himself as a child standing beneath the Aurelis crest. This was not information from the novel. It belonged to him. Caleb finally understood why this forgotten body had always felt strangely familiar. He had not been randomly placed inside an insignificant character. Somehow, the character the novel forgot had been waiting for him. His previous life had not replaced this one. It had hidden him from it. Julian looked from the glowing inscription to Caleb's face, and recognition slowly replaced disbelief. There was one final heir, he said. A child who disappeared when House Aurelis vanished. Caleb looked around the little bakery he had chosen because he wanted nothing to do with destiny. The warm oven, the flour on his sleeves, and the ancient light suddenly belonged to the same story. He had spent weeks believing he was free because the novel had forgotten him. Now he understood something far more unsettling. Someone had made sure the novel forgot him. Caleb barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, fragments of another childhood returned. Golden wheat fields, white stone halls, and the warmth of the ancient hearth beneath his family home. By morning, however, he had reached one conclusion. Being called a prince changed nothing about the work waiting downstairs. At 6 o'clock, he tied on his apron and began kneading dough. Julian arrived before opening and silently helped stack chairs. You discovered you are the missing heir of an erased royal house. And you are still making bread, Julian said. Caleb shaped another loaf. People still need breakfast. Julian smiled. That may be the most royal answer I have ever heard. When the first batch entered the oven, white gold light appeared beneath Caleb's hands. This time it did not frighten him. The warmth moved through the bakery in a gentle wave. An alpha waiting near the counter released a long breath, as if an invisible pressure had lifted. An anxious Omega beside him relaxed too. Caleb watched carefully. The power was not controlling anyone. It was removing something that interfered with their natural emotional balance. Later, Julian brought a sealed document copied from an old royal archive. It described House Aurelis as guardians of sacred resonance, an ancient alpha bloodline whose presence could purify distorted pheromones and quiet compulsions without overriding free will. Caleb read the passage twice. Alpha bloodline. Julian nodded. Your beta classification was probably part of the concealment. As if responding to the words, warmth gathered beneath Caleb's collarbone. A faint 7-pointed mark appeared in white gold light before fading again. Another memory returned. His mother placing a seal over the mark and telling him that the world must believe he was ordinary until it was safe for him to come home. Caleb sat quietly. He had spent this life believing he was beta, only to discover that even his designation had been hidden. Sacred Alpha, Julian said softly. Caleb looked toward the customers sharing tables near the window. If this power is sacred, it is not because it makes me stronger than them. Julian waited. It is sacred because it leaves them free. For a moment, neither man spoke. Julian's expression held something warmer than curiosity now. That is why the hearth answered you, he said. Caleb shook his head. I did not even know it existed. Exactly. Before you knew you were a prince, you fed people who could not afford breakfast. Before you knew you were an alpha, you treated every designation equally. Power did not make you who you are. Caleb met his eyes, unexpectedly moved by the certainty in Julian's voice. Beneath them, the sacred hearth glowed once, like a quiet heartbeat. Then new words appeared along the edge of the ancient crest. Caleb brushed flour aside and read them aloud. When the forgotten heir returns, the hearth shall reveal what the crown erased. Julian's expression changed. Caleb understood why. House Aurelis had not simply been forgotten. Somewhere in the kingdom, the truth about why it vanished was still waiting to be uncovered. The truth did not stay beneath Morningstar Bakery for long. Within 3 days, Word reached the capital that the lost heir of House Aurelis had returned, and by the end of the week, 3 royal carriages were waiting outside Caleb's door. The royal council expected him to leave Belrose immediately, accept formal recognition, and begin preparations for restoration of his title. Caleb listened politely while shaping sourdough behind the counter. "Your Highness," one council representative said, clearly uncomfortable with flour floating through the air, "your place is at court." Caleb looked at the customers eating breakfast near the windows. "Where was my place when everyone believed I was an ordinary beta?" The representative hesitated. "That was before we understood your identity. My identity did not create my value." Julian, standing quietly beside the coffee station, said nothing, but Caleb caught the approval in his eyes. Caleb refused to abandon the bakery. He agreed to investigate House Aurelis, but only on his own terms. That decision created another problem. Rumors about Caleb and Julian had already reached the noble houses. 2 alphas spending every morning together was treated as suspicious. 2 powerful alphas developing obvious affection was considered unacceptable. The kingdom's oldest social codes claimed alpha bonds required hierarchy, with one will eventually dominating the other. Caleb found that argument strangely familiar. It sounded less like nature and more like something people had repeated until nobody remembered to question it. That evening, Julian brought several copied records from the restricted archives. They sat at Caleb's usual corner table while rain tapped softly against the bakery windows. Caleb compared dates, legal revisions, and missing references. Then he noticed something. Every document describing alpha partnerships before the disappearance of House Aurelis had been removed or rewritten. "Julian, look at the dates." Julian leaned closer. The prohibition appeared after Aurelis vanished. Caleb nodded. What if alpha bonds were never impossible? They searched until midnight. Finally, Julian found a surviving fragment hidden inside an agricultural charter, a place no political censor had apparently thought to examine. It described 2 alpha guardians serving the Sacred Hearth together, neither commanding the other, their bond recognized through mutual consent. Caleb stared at the words. The novel he remembered had contained countless alpha and omega romances, yet not one relationship between 2 alphas. He had assumed that was simply how this world worked. Now he understood the possibility was far more disturbing. Those relationships had not been absent because they were impossible. Someone had erased the evidence that they had ever existed. Julian looked at Caleb across the quiet table. We were both forgotten by the story. Caleb felt the Sacred Hearth pulse beneath the floor. Maybe that was never an accident. White gold light suddenly traveled across the ancient crest, then climbed toward a section of brick behind the oven. Hidden writing appeared there for the first time. Julian read the first line, and his expression turned grave. To those who inherit the hearth, beware the keeper of the royal memory. Caleb understood immediately. Someone inside the institution responsible for preserving history had been responsible for destroying it. The warning pointed toward one man. Victor Hale, the royal archivist who had controlled Alderwin's historical records for nearly 30 years. Caleb expected denial when Hale arrived in Belrose the following afternoon. Instead, the older alpha entered Morningstar Bakery, looked directly at the glowing crest beneath the floor, and smiled with quiet recognition. So the Sacred Hearth finally chose to wake, he said. Julian immediately stepped beside Caleb. Hale noticed and gave a humorless laugh. An alpha beside another alpha. House Aurelis always did encourage inconvenient ideas. Caleb folded his arms. You erased those ideas. I preserved stability. Hale explained that generations of royal archivists had removed records concerning sacred alpha bonds, House Aurelis, and the true purpose of the hearth. The crown had feared a power capable of neutralizing coercive pheromones because it threatened every institution built upon alpha dominance. Hale believed the hearth could be reversed, transformed from a sanctuary into a source that amplified alpha authority. That is why you came here, Caleb said. You do not want me. You want what is beneath my bakery. Hale did not deny it. Caleb looked toward the oven, remembering every customer who had relaxed inside this room. The hearth had never made anyone obedient. It had done exactly the opposite. It had given people enough peace to hear their own thoughts. You misunderstood the power, Caleb said. Hale approached the ancient crest and placed his hand over its center. Nothing happened. It requires Aurelis blood. No, Caleb replied. That is what you wanted to require. He had spent days studying the symbols as if they were a recipe. Repeated shapes were ingredients. Their position created meaning. One symbol appeared beside every reference to sacred resonance. Two equal circles connected by an open line. Caleb finally understood. The hearth does not answer blood alone. It answers a relationship without control. New white gold words appeared around the crest. Julian read them aloud. Two sovereign wills, freely joined. Neither above, neither below. Hale shook his head. Two alphas cannot share power. Caleb met his eyes. Your archives taught everyone that because your predecessors removed the proof. The hearth brightened. Julian extended his hand toward Caleb but stopped before touching him. Your choice, he said. That simple restraint carried more meaning than any declaration could have. Caleb looked at the man who had entered his bakery seeking silence, and stayed because he respected the person behind the counter. Then Caleb took Julian's hand. White gold light swept through the room, warm and pure. Their alpha presences rose together, yet neither overwhelmed the other. Instead, the energy beneath the bakery became perfectly calm. Ancient writing spread across the walls. Power becomes sacred only when another remains free beside it. Hale stared as the truth appeared around him. The hearth had never been created to make an alpha supreme. It existed to ensure that no alpha ever could become supreme through domination. Caleb felt Julian's hand resting gently in his, free to leave and equally free to remain. In that moment, Caleb understood why their history had been erased. The most dangerous truth in a world built on hierarchy was not that two alphas could love each other. It was that they could love each other as equals. By the next morning, Morningstar Bakery looked exactly as it always had. Bread cooled on wooden racks, coffee steamed behind the counter, and cinnamon drifted through the warm air. Yet everything had changed. Victor Hale's confession, the restored inscriptions, and Julian's copies of the original records gave Caleb enough evidence to prove that House Aurelis had been deliberately erased. The Royal Council could no longer dismiss the truth as legend. Caleb was formally recognized as the Lost Prince, but when officials arrived with ceremonial robes and plans to move him to the capital, they found him dusting flour from his apron. Your Highness, the palace is prepared for you, one official said. Caleb placed another loaf on the cooling rack. Then the palace can wait until the morning rush is over. Julian laughed quietly from his usual table. Caleb eventually accepted his title, but he refused to let it replace his life. Morningstar remained open. More importantly, Caleb used his restored inheritance to create community bakeries and grain cooperatives throughout poorer districts, giving independent bakers access to shared supplies and ensuring that families could buy basic bread even when harvests failed. He also opened small sanctuaries where Alpha, Beta, and Omega residents could seek help without being judged by designation. Caleb had learned that power mattered most when it gave other people more choices. Victor Hale was removed as Royal Archivist, but Caleb refused to destroy the records Hale's predecessors had manipulated. Every altered document was preserved beside the original evidence. If we erase the lie, Caleb told the council, future generations may never understand how easily people were convinced to believe it. The restored histories revealed that alpha partnerships had once been recognized throughout Alderwyn. The old restrictions were repealed, not because Caleb demanded special treatment for himself and Julian, but because no honest law could survive after its foundation had been proven false. Through all of it, Julian continued arriving at 7:15 each morning. Same rosemary bread. Same black coffee. Same table beside the window. One morning Caleb set the order down and smiled. You know you do not need the hearth anymore. Julian looked up. I know. Then why are you still here every morning? Julian's expression softened. Because the peace was what brought me through the door. You are why I stayed. Caleb sat across from him. Their relationship needed no hierarchy and no ancient prophecy to justify it. They disagreed, challenged each other, shared responsibilities, and chose each other freely. Two alphas, neither above nor below. Months later, while closing the bakery, Caleb noticed something strange on a shelf in his private room. The BL novel from his previous life was lying there. He had not seen it since awakening in Alderwyn. When he opened it, the pages describing Belrose were different. Caleb Morgan was no longer mentioned once and forgotten. New white gold words slowly appeared across a page that had once been blank. The forgotten prince has returned. Caleb's breath caught. Another sentence formed beneath it. The first hearth is awake. Caleb stared at the word first. He turned the page. A map appeared across the paper, marked with 7 ancient symbols scattered across distant kingdoms. 1 symbol glowed over Belrose. 6 remained dark. Julian stepped beside him just as a second symbol, hundreds of miles east, began to flicker. White gold light traced a circle around it. Caleb felt the sacred resonance beneath Morningstar answer with a quiet pulse. He had opened a bakery because he wanted to escape someone else's story. Instead, he had discovered that forgotten people could reclaim their own stories, that love did not require submission, and that history could be questioned when truth no longer matched tradition. But as the second hearth slowly awakened on the map, Caleb understood that his story had never ended at Morningstar. Somewhere beyond Belrose, another forgotten secret had just remembered how to wake.